There was blood in the snow, but not enough to explain the silence. It was the kind of stillness that didn't just settle, it pressed down, thick and unnerving, like the sky itself was holding its breath. The man noticed it from the porch just after dawn, his mug of black coffee untouched, cooling fast in the brittle Montana air. Two shapes near the barn caught his eye. He squinted against the pale light, breath fogging in the glass. One stood tall and narrow, poised as if carved from the winter itself. The other was curled low beside it, trembling faintly in the snow. It took a long second for the image to click into meaning. A bobcat and a coyote, side by side. His grip on the mug tightened until his knuckles whitened. Not from fear, no, that feeling had long since worn thin, but from something deeper, something more guttural. A shiver of disbelief threaded through his chest, colder than the wind. Those two animals should never have been near each other. Not here. Not in January. Not anywhere. Predators don't form partnerships. They don't stand guard over one another. They don't share shelter or silence or space. And yet here they were, perfectly still, as though the ground had frozen them in place. He stepped closer to the window, pressing his palm against the cracked wooden frame as if trying to feel their reality through the glass. His coffee had gone cold, but he didn't notice. He hadn't really felt warmth in years, not since everything inside him had turned to ash. But this was something, not a hallucination, not grief's cruel trick, something real and deeply wrong in a way that demanded attention. The bobcat's gaze was fixed toward the tree line, muscles coiled, tail flicking in slow rhythm. Her posture wasn't one of fear. It wasn't hunger either. It was something more protective, something quiet and deliberate. At her feet, the coyote, a pup by the look of him, was barely lifting his head. His body curled unnaturally, one leg bent beneath him at an angle that spoke of pain, maybe even damage that couldn't be undone. And yet he wasn't alone. She was standing over him, not menacing, not indifferent, guarding. The man's voice cracked the stillness inside his house. "What the hell are you two?" he whispered, the words strange on his tongue. It had been days since he'd spoken aloud. Weeks, maybe. There hadn't been a reason to. The last visitor up that winding gravel road was a survey drone, buzzing uselessly overhead like a forgotten promise. The last phone call had been a misdial. Nobody came out this far anymore. Not since the winter of 19. Not since he stopped answering. He pulled on his jacket, the one with the frayed cuffs and missing buttons, and stepped into his boots without lacing them. The cold met him like an old enemy, familiar and sharp. Snow crunched underfoot, brittle and dry like crushed glass. The pine-laced wind scraped his lungs as he crossed the yard, slow and measured. The animals didn't move. The bobcat's eyes flicked to him once, and he felt it. Recognition, not threat. She didn't flee, didn't shift. Her muscles tensed, but she held her ground. The coyote stirred slightly, eyes dull, glazed with discomfort. That leg wasn't just sore, it was broken, maybe worse. He wouldn't survive long out here like that. The man took 10 more steps and stopped, sensing the edge of their trust, or at least the threshold of their tolerance. He let the cold soak into his bones and stood still, letting them read his posture, his silence. The wind picked up, lifting powdery snow across the yard in soft spirals. Still, they did not move. Then, as fluid as breath, the bobcat turned. One motion, one decision. She stepped away, not in panic but in purpose, retreating into the trees. The coyote struggled to rise, staggered and limped after her, one painful step at a time. She paused just at the tree line, waiting for him. And when he caught up, they disappeared together. The man stood there long after the trees had swallowed them. He didn't go back inside. He couldn't. Not yet. The image lingered in his mind like a ghost. He had tracked elk across black ice, hunted wolves in storms that would gut a lesser man, once survived 2 weeks alone after his snowmobile flipped near the ravine. But this thing he saw, this bond between predator and predator, it haunted him. "What were you?" he murmured again, quieter this time. He stayed outside until the sun died behind the pines and the dark came spilling in from the edges of the world. That night, even in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about them. Not the strangeness, not the science, but the question that tugged at something raw inside his chest. Why did they come here? There were miles of wilderness behind them, open valleys, ridges untouched by boot or wheel. This cabin was a speck, a forgotten breath on the map, and yet they came. together. The wild doesn't come back twice. He knew that. He'd spent years learning that lesson, burning bridges with every unanswered call, every unopened letter. Once it's gone, it's gone. But then they did. 2 mornings later, he saw them again. This time, they were closer, barely 20 feet from the barn. He spotted them through the frost-fogged window, just as the first light broke through the trees, spreading pale gold across the snow. The coyote came first, limping forward with his nose low to the ground, sniffing like he'd lost something or maybe never had it in the first place. His ribs showed faintly beneath matted fur, and his gait was awkward, that same injured leg dragging behind him like a forgotten limb. The bobcat followed, not beside him but behind, silent, sleek, her movements almost invisible. Her attention wasn't on the pup. It was on the house. He didn't move, didn't even breathe. It had to mean something that they came back. Wild animals don't return to places that feel dangerous. He stood in the doorway a long time, not letting the storm door creak, not breaking the stillness between them. The idea came quietly, not a plan, not a decision, just a feeling in his chest like a whisper. Help them. He found the old metal bowl under the sink, dented and rust-spotted. He ladled in canned chicken he'd warmed on the wood stove. Not gourmet, but soft, warm, easy to chew. It smelled like memory, like something that used to be called home. He stepped out slowly. The air was colder than it looked, biting through the fabric of his coat like teeth. His boots crunched through the snow, sending little crackles through the stillness. The bobcat didn't flinch. She just watched. The coyote paused mid-sniff, head lifting slightly. Halfway between the porch and the barn, he placed the bowl down, then straightened, his hands bare and open at his sides. No sudden movements, no expectations, just space, and something like invitation. Then he backed away, slow and steady, retreating to the doorway like a man backing away from a dream he didn't want to scare off. He didn't go inside. He stood in the cold, letting it settle into his skin, watching. The coyote took a step, then another. The pup was smaller than he'd realized. Not quite a baby, but not yet grown. His ears twitched nervously, and his tail stayed low. He approached the food with the kind of hunger that was careful, almost reverent, as if unsure it wasn't a trap. When he finally reached the bowl, he hesitated for a heartbeat, then dove in, devouring the chicken in frantic gulps. His entire body shook as he ate, whether from cold or desperation. The man couldn't tell. He smiled faintly. "Dusty," he whispered. The name slipped out without thought. It fit. The pup's coat was the same shade as the gravel road in July, the same as the wind-blown haze that coated his porch steps in August. It wasn't just about colour, it was about what he looked like beneath the dirt, beneath the bones poking through his skin. Dusty. That would be his name. The bobcat still hadn't moved. She remained where she was, crouched low in the snow, her gaze locked on the man, not the food. She didn't blink. Her tail flicked once, slow and deliberate. She wasn't there for a meal. She was there for the boy. That much was clear. Sage. That name came softer, almost sacred. Sage, like the plant that grew wild along the southern ridge, tough and sharp and smelling of the earth after rain. Sage, like the wind before a snowstorm, ancient and alert. That's what she reminded him of. Not just a predator. Not just a cat. She was something older than language. He whispered it again. Sage. They stayed there for a long time. A triangle of awareness stretched across the snow. Dusty licked the bowl clean, then sat awkwardly, front paws stiff beneath him. His ears twitched with every gust of wind. Sage stayed planted in the snow, her breathing even and unbothered. The man didn't step forward, didn't try to reach them. He knew better. Trust had to be earned, not taken. So he just stood there watching, letting his presence say what words couldn't. His chest ached, but it wasn't the kind of ache that made you double over. It was the kind that unfroze something you forgot you buried. He hadn't spoken names aloud in months. The last person to hear him say anything soft had been his son, and that voice was long gone now. But here they were, two wild things, breathing and broken, appearing in his yard like omens or gifts or both. That night he left the barn door unlatched, just a little. Not an open invitation, just enough to say, if you need shelter, it's there. No cameras, no chains, just space. The porch light glowed faintly through the blowing snow, casting halos in the air. He sat inside by the window, watching. Sometime after midnight, he saw movement. Dusty emerged first, limping across the snow like a ghost in search of a body. He stepped through the barn door without hesitation. Sage came next, slower, cautious, circling the entrance before stepping inside. The hay rustled once, then silence. He didn't sleep. Not really. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he wanted morning to come. Not because he needed to check the traps or clear the path, but because he wanted to see if they'd still be there. He wanted proof that it wasn't just a flicker, a fluke, a passing thing. He wasn't sure if he was saving them or if they were saving him. When the sun finally cracked the horizon, pale and reluctant, he pulled on his jacket and boots and stepped out onto the porch. His breath curled in front of him in white wisps. Then he heard it, soft, uneven footsteps. Dusty limped out from the barn, slower than before, but more confident. His tail hung low, but this time it gave a faint wag at the end. Behind him, Sage emerged, her body smooth as wind on glass, silent and composed. She stopped a few paces behind Dusty and sat in the snow. They didn't run. He didn't speak. They just looked at each other, and in that quiet something bloomed. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Something with potential. He sat down on the top porch step, resting his elbows on his knees, and for the first time in years he talked. Not to himself, not to the air, but to them. His voice was rough, uneven, like a rusty hinge opening. Sometimes he told them stories, sometimes nonsense. Sometimes he just let his breath form words, any words, just to hear what it sounded like to exist again. And they listened. The days began to stretch longer. The frost on the barn roof lingered into noon, and each morning followed the same quiet rhythm. At the creak of the porch door, Dusty would limp from the barn, his ears twitching at the sound, tail dragging but giving the faintest wag. Moments later, Sage would appear, never rushing, never startled, moving like a shadow detached from its source. She always kept a few paces behind, silent as snowfall, eyes fixed not on him but around him, like she understood the land better than he ever had. They never came closer than necessary. But they didn't run either, and that was enough. He began to speak to them more often. Not every word had meaning. Sometimes he just let syllables tumble out of his mouth, stories he remembered, pieces of days he'd forgotten, jokes with no punchline. He'd say things like, "Did you know Dust Bowl winds once cracked this siding?" Or that tree line used to be wild turkeys every spring. It didn't matter that they couldn't understand the words. It mattered that he was saying them out loud. The world inside his head had grown too loud, too tangled, and now these two wild beings had somehow made space for the sound of his voice. Dusty would tilt his head sometimes, his one good ear perking up, the other flopping lazily. His gaze was soft, curious, like he was trying to figure out the melody of human speech. Sage, on the other hand, never flinched, never blinked. She just watched. It wasn't a predator's stare. It was something different. She wasn't studying what he was saying. She was listening to what wasn't. The silence between the words began to feel smaller. Then came the morning when Dusty didn't emerge right away. The barn door creaked, but no pause followed. The man waited. 5 minutes. 10. Eventually, he stepped down the porch stairs, crossing the yard in slow strides. He pushed the barn door wider, letting the light stretch long across the hay. Dusty was curled in the corner, his back leg pulled tight against his belly. His chest rose with shallow breaths, and when the man moved closer, he saw it clearly. The paw was swollen, discoloured, a sickly purple spreading up the limb. "Infection," he muttered under his breath. He hadn't dealt with one in years, not since the last time his dog Buck had stepped on rusted wire near the creek. He remembered the smell, the way the body fights against its own flesh, the tremble in the muscles from the fever that follows. Dusty was too young, too fragile, too close to losing the fight. He backed out of the barn and returned with the old army tin. The first aid kit had sat untouched for years, buried beneath thermal blankets and a half-empty bottle of iodine. He filled a basin with warm water and tore an old T-shirt into strips. Antibiotic cream, clean gauze, gloves. His hands shook, not from fear but from the weight of what he was about to try. As he stepped back into the barn, Sage stood just outside, not blocking him, not moving, just watching. He crouched beside Dusty. The pup flinched the moment he reached out. A sharp jerk of his head, a low whimper from deep in his throat. "It's okay," the man whispered, his voice lower now, steady like running water. "I'm not here to hurt you." Sage took one step forward, just one. Her body tense as a coiled spring, her ears forward, eyes unreadable. He didn't look at her, didn't meet her stare. He kept his eyes on the pup, letting his words fill the air like smoke. "Easy, boy, just need to clean it up." He dipped the cloth into the warm water and gently pressed it to Dusty's leg. The pup whimpered again, but didn't pull away this time. His eyes locked on the man's hands, breath hitching with every movement. He cleaned around the wound, careful not to push too hard, speaking softly the entire time. Not words of comfort, just rhythm, sound for the sake of steadiness. When he began wrapping the gauze, he felt it. Sage's presence, closer now, her breath, her tension. He didn't stop, just worked through it, wrapping the leg in slow spirals, securing it with the torn t-shirt knot. Dusty let out one last sigh, and then went still. He looked up. Sage was standing at the threshold, the morning light painting her fur in gold and frost. Her eyes met his. Not aggressive, not even fearful, just trusting. Or maybe she simply chose not to fear him that day. He left the barn door wide open that night. They could come and go. No traps, no boundaries they didn't leave. By the end of the week, Dusty limped less. His movements, though still stiff, had found a rhythm. He even barked once, a strange, broken sound that startled the man, but also made him smile. Sage had started resting by the porch during the afternoons, not curled up like a house cat, but sprawled across the grass like a sentinel. One night, heavy rain came down, drumming on the tin roof in waves. He couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at him. He moved through the house, checked the windows, stared into the storm-blurred yard. Then he heard it. A soft creak, the porch boards shifting under weight. Then silence. Then a faint thump. He didn't move. Didn't want to scare them off. At dawn, he opened the door. They were there, curled together on the old wool blanket he'd left just outside. Dusty, curled tight, his head resting on Sage's flank. Her body stretched beside him, eyes closed but ears flicking at the sound of the door hinge. They didn't stir, didn't run, just remained. He stood there in the doorway, barefoot in the cold, smiling without realizing it. The kind of smile that doesn't come from joy but from relief, from something being put back where it belongs. He hadn't smiled like that in years. Maybe not since the funeral, maybe not since before the war. Some people would call it madness, two predators on your porch sleeping like pets. But he didn't see madness. He saw family. The truck rolled up the gravel road just past noon, spitting dust like a warning. He knew that engine. It coughed like an old man trying to remember how to breathe. Hank Moore lived down the slope, a couple miles past the water tower. The kind of neighbor who didn't show up unless something had gone wrong or needed fixing. The last time he'd seen Hank, it was to borrow a chainsaw and complain about property lines. That had been over 3 years ago. This time, Hank didn't knock, just shoved the screen door open like it still belonged to him, mud dripping from his boots onto the wooden floor. "You out of your damn mind?" he barked, his voice already high with disbelief. The man stood silent in the kitchen, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, in the pale wash of sun, Sage sat at the top step of the porch, tail curled neatly around her front paws, still as ever. Dusty was stretched beside her, head resting on his front leg, eyes half-lidded in lazy calm. Hank jabbed a finger toward the door. I saw it with my own eyes. A bobcat, on your porch. Sleeping here? You feeding it?" No answer. Hank's voice pitched up. "You think this is a joke? You forget what they are. They're not strays, they're not house pets. They're killers. They're wild. You're lucky they ain't torn your throat out yet." Still, the man said nothing. He just kept watching through the window, like maybe if he stayed quiet long enough, Hank would vanish like a bad storm. "They don't love you," Hank snapped. "They don't care about you. The second they're hungry or spooked, they'll tear you up. You really want to be a headline? Local hermit mauled by his own wildlife?" But it wasn't true. He'd lived through snow and silence, through storm winds that clawed at the walls, through nights so hollow they echoed inside his chest, and through all of it, Sage and Dusty had stayed. Not once had he seen a flicker of violence in their eyes, not even when he touched Dusty's wound, not even when he stumbled on the porch and Sage had tensed, alert but not attacking. What he saw in them wasn't instinct. It wasn't hunger. It was something else. Understanding. Hank slammed his palm against the doorframe. The crack echoed through the quiet kitchen. "This is how folks get themselves killed. You live out here alone. Who's going to call for help when they turn on you? Huh? You think they'll hold your hand when your ribs are showing through your skin?" Sage shifted. She rose slowly, every movement precise, controlled, her eyes fixed on the doorway. Dusty sat up beside her, alert now, not aggressive but present. Like they knew what was happening, like they were standing between the man and something they didn't trust. They looked ancient, like stone statues worn smooth by time and weather. Like guardians from some old story people had forgotten how to tell. Hank must have felt it too. He muttered something under his breath and backed toward the screen door. Didn't even close it behind him. Just disappeared in a trail of footsteps and diesel smoke. The man stayed where he was long after the engine faded into the trees. They all thought he was broken. They whispered that he was lost, that the war had stripped him clean, left him hollow, a shell pacing through empty rooms. Maybe they were right. After the accident, after the funeral, there wasn't much left inside him but memory and silence. His wife had tried to hold on, but he'd slipped through her hands like sand. When she left, he hadn't fought. He hadn't said a word. He'd stopped saying anything. Until Sage and Dusty. Now, when he spoke, Sage's ears twitched. Dusty blinked and tilted his head. They didn't speak back, but they stayed. And every word out of his mouth felt less like an echo and more like something heard. That night, he didn't light the fireplace. Instead, he let the stove crackle low. The house was warm enough, and he wanted the quiet to stretch long. He sank onto the couch, the springs groaning under the weight of him. Dusty curled on the rug near his boots, eyes already slipping closed. Sage lay by the door, her head raised, ears tuned outward, always alert, always watching. There were no chains, no cages, just presence, just trust. And for the first time in years, he slept like someone who wasn't alone. But the world has a way of peering in when it's not invited. The next evening, Hank's grainy cell phone video appeared online. The footage was shaky, zoomed in from behind a tree or across a fence line, but it was clear enough. Sage sitting calmly on the porch beside the man in his old flannel jacket, sipping coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Dusty was there too, curled on the step like a tired dog after a long walk. The caption was written in all caps, "Wild animals at Crazy Vet's farm. This is not normal." It didn't take long. By midnight, there were thousands of views. Comments poured in like a storm. Somebody call animal control. "Is this legal? That coyote looks sick. He's keeping predators like pets. This is a public safety issue. He needs to be locked up." By morning, it had been picked up by a regional news blog, then reposted by a community safety group. They labelled it a threat. They cited codes, listed past attacks by coyotes and bobcats in other counties. None of it had anything to do with him. But it didn't matter. Nobody called to ask. Nobody knocked on his door. They didn't want answers. They wanted control. A week later, the envelope arrived. Plain white. No return address. The seal already loosening at the corners. He opened it with the edge of his pocket knife. Just a single sheet of paper. Violation of Montana Wildlife Code. Unauthorized harboring of protected native species. Bobcat. Coyote. He was in breach. No second warning. Fines. Legal action. Potential seizure. He read the words once, slowly, then folded the paper back into thirds, just as neat. He didn't throw it away. He didn't burn it. He slid it beneath a stack of newspapers by the fireplace, wedging it between articles about distant wars and forgotten storms. Then he stepped outside. Sage was sunbathing near the porch, her eyes half closed, tail flicking lazily. Dusty crawled out from under the deck when he heard the screen door creak. The man knelt down beside them, pulled them both in. Their fur was warm against his hands. Real. "I won't let them take you," he whispered, and for the first time in years his voice cracked. Neither animal flinched. Neither moved away. Sage leaned into him slightly. Dusty licked the back of his hand, slow and steady. That night he didn't sleep. He sat beside the fire, one hand resting on Dusty's back, the other clutching nothing but the air. His ears strained for any noise. Engines on gravel, footsteps in snow, a knock that wouldn't come with kindness. Just before dawn, Dusty let out a low bark, sharp but unsure. Not fear. Warning. Sage was already standing, her body rigid, ears forward. The man stood and stepped out onto the porch. Headlights, far off, crawling up the road like a thought that didn't belong. Not police, not yet. But something was coming. Something that didn't care about trust or quiet or the language they'd built without words. Something with rules and cages. She drove a white state-issued SUV with the seal of Montana Wildlife Control on the door. The tires rolled slow over the gravel, each crunch like a clock ticking down. When the vehicle stopped just past the gate, he already stood waiting, arms crossed tight over his chest, boots rooted in the dust. Sage and Dusty watched from the porch, unmoving, alert. The wind pushed at the trees behind them, but no one else moved. She stepped out with the practiced calm of someone used to confrontation. Mid-30s, sharp uniform, hair pulled into a knot so tight it looked like it might snap. Her badge caught a sliver of sun. Her expression was unreadable, not cold, not kind. "Mr. Callahan?" she asked. He nodded once. "I'm Officer Riley, Wildlife Enforcement." She didn't offer a handshake. He didn't expect one. "We've received several formal reports, video evidence, statements from neighbors. You are knowingly harboring a bobcat and a juvenile coyote on your private property. You are feeding them, sheltering them, and potentially attempting to domesticate." He didn't say anything. "I don't care what you think they mean to you," she went on. "I'm sure you believe you're doing the right thing, but they're wild animals, protected, regulated. You're in violation of both state code and federal guidelines." Still, no response. Her voice lowered slightly, the edge softening but never breaking. "You've got 7 days. That's a courtesy. After that, we act. And you don't want that. Not for them." She turned and walked back to the SUV, her boots making shallow prints in the dust. The door closed, the engine started, and she drove away without another word. He watched until the sound disappeared behind the ridge. That night he built a fire behind the barn. Not in the stove, not in the fireplace, in the pit they used to sit beside. The wood popped and hissed as it caught, the light flickering across his weathered face. He sat on a log, knees drawn up, hands resting on his thighs. Dusty limped over first, curling up at his feet, laying his head against the man's leg like he'd always belonged there. Sage followed, slower, more cautious. But she didn't sit apart this time. She lay beside him. Her shoulder touched his. "They'll take you," he said quietly, voice rasping like wind through brittle branches. "They'll cage you, separate you, study you." Sage didn't blink. Dusty's breathing slowed. He closed his eyes and saw it. Chain-link fences, gloved hands, sterile rooms that smelled of chemicals and rubber. No grass, no wind, just the cold hum of fluorescent lights. They weren't built for that. Not Sage, not Dusty, not him either. Too wild for home, too broken for the forest, caught in between. He ran his hand down Dusty's back, scratched softly behind Sage's ear. "If they take you," he whispered, throat tightening, "they'll break you." The thought hit like a rifle shot. Sudden, final. He barely had time to understand it before the world tilted. He was behind the barn, splitting firewood when it happened. One moment the axe was in his hands, the next it was on the ground. His vision wobbled. His knees gave out. He hit the frozen dirt with a thud, the sky spinning above him. His chest seized. No warning, no pain at first, just the sick, dizzying sense of something vital slipping loose inside him. He clawed for his coat pocket, found the phone. His fingers barely worked. Slapped the screen once, twice, then hit a number he hadn't called in years. 911. "What is your emergency?" His words spilled out, slurred, broken, choked with effort. Then nothing. Everything went black. He woke up in a place that wasn't his ceiling, wasn't his house. It was white. Too white. Machines beeped softly in the background, steady and impersonal. A drip line ran into his arm. The air smelled like antiseptic and vinyl. Voices came and went. He didn't care what they said. Didn't ask about his heart. Didn't ask about himself. "Did they come with me?" he whispered, lips cracked, barely able to form the shape of the words. A nurse paused. "Your animals?" He nodded weakly. She frowned. "Neighbors said they ran. Took off into the woods when the ambulance arrived. Haven't been seen since." He turned his head into the pillow and said nothing more. The weight of absence settled into his chest like a stone. The sound of the IV drip ticked time away, but he stayed still. His eyes stayed open, but his mind went elsewhere, back into the forest, imagining two shadows, alone and frightened, pushing through the underbrush with no one to guide them. Dusty still limping, Sage still protecting. He had promised them safety, promised them something permanent. And now they were gone, No war had ever made him cry, not the funerals, not the medals, not the endless dark. But now, under the hospital lights, silent and sterile, he sobbed into the pillow like a boy. No one saw. No one needed to. "I failed them," he whispered, over and over. "I failed them." When he returned home, the silence hit harder than he expected. No paw prints on the porch, no scratches near the food bowls, no soft breathing beneath the windows, just emptiness. He moved through the rooms like a stranger. The blanket he'd left by the door still sat folded. The shirt he'd used to wrap Dusty's paw lay untouched on the shelf. The water bowl was full, undisturbed. It looked like nothing had ever lived there at all. 2 days passed. Then the black SUV pulled in. This time it wasn't wildlife control. It was law enforcement. 2 officers stepped out, uniforms crisp, expressions unreadable. One held a clipboard. The other's hand hovered near his hip. "You've already received a formal warning," said the tall one. "If the animals return and you shelter them again, it will be considered a second offence." "Which means seizure, criminal charges and possible jail time," added the other. He said nothing. They handed him paperwork. They didn't wait for acknowledgement, just turned and left. He didn't read it, didn't need to. That night, he wandered into the woods without a flashlight, without a coat, just his boots, his flannel, and 2 names stuck in his throat. He called for them until his voice went raw, searched the ravine, the deer trail, the creek. Nothing, no fur, no paw prints, only silence, until he found it. A small patch of grey fur tangled in the brush, stained at the root. Nearby, a streak of dried blood along the edge of a stone, no body, no tracks, just a whisper of what had been. He sat there until night took the sky, his hands clenched in frozen soil. "I lost them," he said, like he had lost everything else. His wife, his son, and now this. The next night he didn't search. He built another fire behind the barn, and he waited. It started with a sound he hadn't heard in weeks, a crunch in the snow, soft, deliberate, just beyond the fire's reach. At first he didn't trust it. Maybe it was wind through dry branches, or a deer veering too close to the tree line. The flames hissed and popped behind him as he slowly turned his head, afraid that hope might play tricks on him again. Then he saw her. Sage. She stood just beyond the glow of the firelight, at the edge of the trees, where the shadows blurred into the dark. Her coat was duller than before, her ribs more visible beneath her fur, but her eyes, they were the same, wide, steady, impossibly alive. He rose to his feet, knocking the stool behind him into the snow. She flinched at the sound, but didn't run. She simply stood there, measuring him, remembering. He didn't speak, couldn't. His throat locked up with the weight of every night he'd spent calling her name. Of every morning he'd opened the door and found nothing but frost. Sage took 1 step forward, then another. Her movements were tight, cautious. She was thinner now. A pink scar traced her right flank, healed but not forgotten. He lifted a hand, slowly, palm open. She came closer, 1 hesitant step at a time, like she was crossing a river of doubt. Then a rustle in the brush behind her made them both turn. Another shape emerged, Dusty. His gait was off, his front legs still wrapped in something that looked like cloth, torn and dirt-stained, but still wrapped. Someone had helped him. Someone had touched them. But somehow they had made their way back. Back to him. He dropped to his knees in the snow, breath hitching, vision blurred. They didn't hesitate this time. Sage nudged his shoulder with her nose. Dusty let out a low whimper and pressed his head into the man's chest. He wrapped his arms around them both, pulled them in close. Their weight grounded him, anchoring him to the earth again. He didn't care that his knees were freezing or that the pain in his chest burned sharper with each breath. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, over and over. They didn't answer. They didn't have to. Behind him, the fire cracked and spit, a single ember leaping into the air. Then headlights, bright, sudden, cutting across the yard and freezing them all in place like animals caught in a photograph. He didn't turn. He held Sage and Dusty tighter, shielding them with his body like instinct alone could protect them from what came next. The engine idled, then backed away. The headlights disappeared into the trees. Silence returned, but peace didn't, because he knew now, without a doubt, someone was watching. The next visit wouldn't be with words or warnings, it would be with cages. His love had kept them alive, but that same love might now be the very thing that took them away. He had to make a choice. It took him 2 days to find the number. He dug through boxes in the shed, folders of old utility bills, pamphlets, scraps of paper long forgotten. In one, folded between receipts and rusted keys, he found it. A trifold brochure from a conservation expo he never attended. On the front, a logo in faded ink, a private sanctuary in Idaho. Remote, quiet. Not a zoo. Not a lab. A place that promised no cages, no exhibits. Just space. He called. No explanation was needed. When he said their names, his voice cracked. They told him the gate would be open. No reporters, no judgment, just goodbye. The morning he left, he packed only what mattered. Water, a blanket, the 2 old metal bowls they used to eat from. No luggage, no plans. Sage climbed into the back of the van on her own. Dusty hesitated, glanced once at the porch, the field where they used to lie in the sun. Then he followed. The drive was long. Miles of switchbacks, silent valleys, winding mountain passes that twisted like the thoughts in his head. He didn't speak. Neither did the radio. Only the occasional burst of static. At one point, an old country song came through. He turned the volume down before it could finish. Sage rested her head on Dusty's shoulder. He watched them through the mirror, blinking hard when the road blurred. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun had started to dip. Tall fencing rimmed the property, but not like a prison. Wooden posts, open sky, grass that looked real. A barn sat in the centre, weathered and welcoming. No guards, no locks, just a single volunteer waiting by the gate. She nodded, then stepped aside. He parked near the barn and opened the back. Sage jumped down first, cautious but calm. Dusty sniffed the earth like it was the first scent that made sense in weeks. They didn't bolt, didn't hide. They stood facing the field like they belonged there. Then Dusty turned back, unsure. Sage looked at the trees, at him. Then stepped forward, paused and stopped. He walked toward them, placed a hand gently on Sage's back, looked from her to Dusty. "You're free now," he said, voice low, full of things he couldn't say. "But you'll always be mine." They didn't answer. They didn't need to. He got back in the van, drove home the same way he came, without speaking, without sound. It had been 33 days. He counted them, not like a prisoner, but like a man waiting for something sacred, something he wasn't sure would come again. No updates, no photos. The sanctuary didn't allow it. Privacy was their rule. He respected that. But he needed to see for himself. Before sunrise, he drove back. Same van, same coat. The old wrap from Dusty's paw sat in the glove box like a memory that wouldn't leave. At the gate, a young woman greeted him with a careful smile. "They've kept their distance," she said. "We don't follow, we don't chase. If they want to come, they come." He nodded. They pointed him to a trail, shaded, quiet, buried in pine. He followed it until he reached a clearing. No fences here, no cages, just a bench and a stretch of open woods. He sat, didn't move, didn't call. Birds sang, branches swayed. Sunlight crept through the leaves like a promise whispered in a forgotten language. Nothing came, until it did. A shape moved at the edge of the brush, then another. Sage stepped out first, stronger now, coat fuller, eyes sharp. Dusty behind her, tail low, gait uneven, but his eyes bright. They walked toward him, not running, not hiding, just moving with purpose. They stopped 2 feet away. Sage looked at him for a long moment. Then she pressed her head against his knee. Dusty touched his hand with his nose. 1 second, maybe 2. Then they turned back into the trees. He didn't follow. He smiled. Because they had come back not to stay, but to say something. "We remember. We're free, and so are you."